If you think this story is intense, hit subscribe, smash that like and comment below, because nothing you've seen is as dark as what unfolds behind these walls. The morning at ADX Florence started like any other, cold, silent and impenetrable. The fortress-like Supermax, nestled in the rugged isolation of Colorado's San Luis Valley, seemed unshakable. Its reinforced steel bars, concrete walls and surveillance cameras promised order, control and security. But beneath the disciplined facade, a world of shadows thrived. A world where gangs ruled with silent oaths, corruption festered behind the walls, and every inmate had secrets to protect. Inside cell block 12, whispers traveled faster than footsteps. The Brotherhood, an alliance of hardened inmates, had been planning for months. Their network wasn't just confined to the yard, it stretched across blocks, weaving through the corridors like veins pumping life into the prison's underground. Each member had a role: lookout, smuggler, planner, enforcer. And they trusted each other with one unspoken rule: betrayal meant death. Lieutenant Harris, a seasoned correctional officer, walked the tier with a practiced, heavy tread. He had seen it all: fights, contraband, desperate inmates plotting in the shadows. Yet even he could feel the tension in the air that morning. Something was off. Guards whispered among themselves, eyes flicking toward the reinforced doors that seemed unbreakable. But in a place like ADX Florence, the walls were just the beginning. Meanwhile, in the administrative offices, investigation reports stacked neatly on a desk hinted at cracks in the system. Multiple staff had been implicated in minor infractions: smuggled phones, unauthorized communication, favoritism. No one had yet realized the depth of the corruption, how easily a few complicit officers could shift the balance of power within these walls. Inmate day routines began, predictable as clockwork. The feeding line stretched into a monotony of metal trays and institutional blandness. Yet, small signals passed unnoticed. A tray slightly shifted, a conversation held too close to the cell door, a guard looking the other way. Every act was a thread in a complex web that could unravel at any moment. Across the prison, female inmates in their segregated wing faced a different reality. Crowded cells, strict oversight, and minimal contact with staff made life a constant test of resilience. A young teen, recently transferred for a minor gang-related offense, quietly observed the older women. She noted the subtle ways alliances formed, how favors were exchanged for safety, and how every moment was a battle for control. Birthdays passed unnoticed for most, yet some celebrated quietly with shared meals or whispered rituals, a fragile claim to humanity in a place designed to strip it away. As the morning wore on, tensions escalated. A minor altercation in the yard between rival factions of the Brotherhood exploded into a series of scuffles, barely contained by officers. Lieutenant Harris watched from above, heart tightening. These weren't random fights. The pattern suggested planning, messages, coordination. Every punch, every shove, every shout hinted at a deeper strategy. Hidden cameras caught subtle movements: a guard momentarily distracted, a prisoner positioning himself strategically, contraband passing silently from hand to hand. The surveillance feeds, though monitored, failed to capture the human intent behind each gesture. The Brotherhood was not just a gang, it was an organization operating with military-like precision, mapping every shift change, every blind spot, and every weak point in the system. In the mess hall, rumors spread like wildfire. Inmates whispered about a planned event, a test of the walls themselves. Officers dismissed the chatter as bravado, standard boasting among hardened prisoners. But the whispers reached the ears of one keen observer: Warden Clayton, a man who had dedicated decades to prison management. He knew enough to be alarmed and too little to prevent it. Every glance at the Brotherhood's members revealed calculated eyes, calm and patient, waiting for the right moment. By mid-afternoon, the subtle signals transformed into overt preparation. Sheets were folded, tools hidden in plain sight, and alliances reaffirmed. The Brotherhood had chosen a date, and the next few hours would determine whether ADX Florence's reputation as the most secure prison in America would remain intact. Lieutenant Harris made rounds in the West Wing, unaware that one of his colleagues had already crossed a line. Small favors, previously overlooked, had created openings. Doors left ajar for seconds, information leaked under the guise of routine paperwork, and the Brotherhood's plan edged closer to execution. It wasn't chaos yet, but the tension was palpable, like the taut string of a bow ready to release its arrow. The day waned, but shadows lengthened differently inside the prison walls. Inmates prepared for nightfall with the careful patience of predators. The Brotherhood's leadership convened in a small, hidden corner, communicating in hushed tones. Every member understood their role. Every officer was a variable. They had accounted for routine security patterns and even potential betrayals. Yet one small unknown remained: could the corrupt elements inside the Guard Corps inadvertently betray them, or aid them? As the night approached, the routine clanged and echoed through the corridors: lockdowns, lights out, and surveillance routines. But the Brotherhood moved silently, executing last-minute preparations. Metal bars were inspected, movements rehearsed, and contingency plans solidified. The tension was a living thing, pulsating through the prison, unobserved by those outside the walls but deadly in its inevitability. And then it happened, a sound so subtle it could have been dismissed. A door latch shifted unexpectedly in the east wing. A guard stepped back, distracted by routine paperwork. Inmates froze momentarily, then continued their task with mechanical precision. What seemed minor, inconsequential even, was the first crack in the fortress. By midnight, the prison was in complete lockdown. The Brotherhood's plan was ready. Outside, the world slept unaware of the storm building behind reinforced steel, under surveillance cameras, and beneath concrete floors designed to contain chaos. One misstep could end it all, but success promised a fleeting taste of freedom, and a permanent mark on ADX Florence's history. And just when investigators and officers believed the day's tension had passed, a new revelation came to light. A hidden cell, unnoticed by staff for years, had been discovered during routine maintenance. Inside, markings suggested coordination, coded messages, references to movements, and a map of the prison's inner workings. It was clear now, the Brotherhood had not just planned for survival inside ADX Florence, they had planned something far more audacious. But when Lieutenant Harris finally reviewed the surveillance tapes late that night, one frame froze him in his tracks. Something he had never expected. Someone inside the administration had betrayed the protocol, and the implications of that single action would shake the prison to its core. The Brotherhood was ready, the corrupt elements were in play, and an unknown player inside the prison would determine who survived the coming storm. And no one, not even the warden, knew how far this plan had already reached. The dawn was gray and sharp over ADX Florence, and the Supermax prison awoke with the hollow sound of metal doors and footsteps echoing through concrete corridors. But inside, the atmosphere was far from ordinary. The Brotherhood, emboldened by months of planning, had begun testing the prison's weak points, subtly and systematically. A small scuffle in the yard, dismissed by some guards as typical rivalry, was only the beginning. Lieutenant Harris walked the tiers with his usual watchful precision. Yet even his seasoned instincts could not fully read the tension that had taken root. Reports of unusual inmate movement had reached him. Late-night whispering in previously quiet cells, contraband appearing in unexpected places, and the faint but unmistakable signs of coordination. Each small anomaly pointed toward something far more audacious than routine mischief. The Brotherhood had split into specialized groups. One faction, the Eyes, surveilled guard routines, mapping blind spots and shift changes with near-military precision. Another faction, the Hands, handled smuggling and positioning of tools, papers, and communication devices. A third, the Enforcers, maintained internal discipline, ensuring loyalty and punishing dissent. The level of organization rivaled that of criminal organizations operating outside these walls, and the consequences for mistakes were immediate and brutal. Corruption within the staff became painfully evident. A handful of officers had been bribed or coerced into subtle complicity, leaving doors unlocked for seconds, misreporting surveillance irregularities, or turning a blind eye to contraband. What was supposed to be a tightly controlled fortress had hidden cracks, and those cracks were about to widen. Meanwhile, in the female wing of ADX Florence, tensions were also rising. Reports of stolen commissary items, secret alliances, and covert communication with male inmates highlighted the network of influence stretching throughout the facility. Officers attempted to maintain order, but even minor disruptions threatened to escalate. In one quiet corner, a small birthday celebration turned tense when an inmate confronted another over a stolen portion of cake, reminding everyone that survival in prison extended to even the smallest daily moments. By mid-morning, a confrontation in the main yard became unavoidable. Two factions of the Brotherhood collided over disputed territory. What began as a verbal spat quickly escalated to shoves, then punches. Officers rushed in, but the scuffle revealed deeper issues. Certain guards hesitated, their loyalties divided, while others responded too aggressively, feeding the cycle of mistrust. Cameras captured the chaos, but they could not capture the subtleties. The silent signals, the prearranged movements, the coded warnings being passed from cell to cell. In one of the corridors, a hidden meeting took place between Brotherhood leaders. Their plan was simple yet audacious: leverage internal corruption to orchestrate a short-term diversion, test response times, and gather intel for the eventual escape. Every contingency had been considered. Yet even the most detailed plan could not account for the unpredictability of human emotion. Lieutenant Harris was increasingly uneasy. He began reviewing security logs with a magnified focus, attempting to spot the faintest irregularities. What he found was both alarming and perplexing. A senior officer had been manipulating shift schedules, seemingly innocuous but in reality allowing certain inmates to access areas without supervision. Paper trails, minor procedural deviations, and unusual contraband reports all pointed to one uncomfortable conclusion: the prison's internal integrity was compromised. Simultaneously, the feeding line revealed subtle but significant tensions. Inmates from rival factions exchanged terse glances and brief confrontations over metal trays and meager portions. A young teen, recently transferred from minor gang affiliations, observed quietly, absorbing lessons in survival, deception, and loyalty. For many, these daily routines, meals, hygiene, and even birthday rituals, were battlegrounds in a larger war for dominance and survival within the walls. By late afternoon, the Brotherhood initiated its first test of the system. Minor mechanical failures, deliberately orchestrated, disrupted a routine cell lock. A guard, distracted by paperwork, barely noticed the shift in timing. The inmates exploited this gap, moving strategically but cautiously. Nothing had yet escalated to full-blown escape, but the signals were clear. The Brotherhood could act at the right moment, and the foundations of security were far from foolproof. Rival factions watched one another with suspicion. Informants, subtle betrayals, and miscommunications began to surface. One inmate, previously trusted, was found passing contraband to a faction outside the Brotherhood's immediate control. Loyalty, once assumed, became a commodity that could be bought, coerced, or threatened. Each betrayal intensified paranoia, yet it also sharpened the cohesion among the remaining loyal members. The day shifted toward evening, and with it came another layer of tension: internal investigations. Warden Clayton convened a meeting with senior staff, attempting to reconcile conflicting reports. Cameras and logs were reviewed, but the subtlety of inmate coordination made detection nearly impossible. Corruption among staff complicated matters, as some officers deliberately misrepresented events or withheld critical information. In the female wing, a minor revolt emerged. An inmate attempted to organize others against a guard's decision to punish a petty infraction, highlighting how discontent and leadership could arise unexpectedly. Officers quickly quelled the incident, but it exposed vulnerabilities in the control system and reminded all observers that power within the prison was a constantly shifting force. By nightfall, the Brotherhood had completed their first covert operation successfully. It was minor, a diversion, a test, but it demonstrated the cracks in the system. Guards were unaware of the full extent of the manipulation, and investigators were beginning to realize that traditional monitoring methods would not be enough. Then a new complication arose. A corrupt officer, motivated by personal gain, inadvertently disrupted one of the Brotherhood's covert meetings, forcing inmates to improvise. The tension was palpable. A small misstep could result in immediate punishment, a failed escape, or deadly retaliation. Yet, the Brotherhood adapted swiftly, demonstrating resilience and discipline that seemed almost preternatural in such a harsh environment. The night concluded with a chilling realization: ADX Florence, long considered unbreakable, was no longer entirely in the hands of those meant to protect it. Gangs had mapped weaknesses, corruption had created opportunities, and human error had opened doors that could not easily be closed. As the final lockdown bell echoed through the prison, Lieutenant Harris noticed a pattern emerging in the surveillance footage. A series of coordinated movements, small enough to appear accidental, but precise enough to suggest a larger scheme. The Brotherhood's next move was imminent, and this time, it would test not only the walls of ADX Florence but the very fabric of trust among guards, inmates, and administration alike. The morning in ADX Florence dawned heavy and gray, a steel and concrete horizon seemingly impenetrable. But the calm was deceptive. Inside, the Brotherhood's planning had matured into audacity. The first true test of their strategy was about to unfold. The day began in the yard, where sunlight struggled through the barbed fences and high watchtowers. A fight broke out between rival factions over territory and influence, escalating faster than guards could respond. Metal clanged against concrete as shouts and threats echoed through the yard. Lieutenant Harris and his team rushed to intervene, but their response was slowed by subtle manipulations. Doors slightly ajar, minor distractions, and the silent complicity of one corrupt officer. Inside the corridors, other factions of the Brotherhood moved with precision. Tools and messages passed unseen between cells, signaling coordination for a broader plan. Each inmate knew their role. Some would distract guards, others would monitor communications, and a select few would probe structural weaknesses in the cell doors and ventilation shafts. In the administrative offices, Warden Clayton reviewed reports of small disturbances and minor equipment malfunctions. What initially seemed like routine trouble now painted a darker picture. The prison's internal structure was under pressure. Corruption among staff complicated tracking. Some officers had been bribed, others intimidated. The warden could see that the Brotherhood had embedded themselves deeply into the system, exploiting weaknesses no policy could entirely prevent. Meanwhile, in the female wing, subtle unrest surfaced. A minor conflict over commissary items erupted, hinting at the pressures facing women inmates in a system that often overlooked their needs. Young teens, observing older women, learned quickly that influence, negotiation, and caution were key to survival. Even birthdays, small, fragile celebrations, were shadowed by tension and the constant threat of confrontation. By afternoon, the Brotherhood escalated their testing. Small fires were set in trash bins, triggering alarms and forcing a partial lockdown. Guards scrambled, and surveillance footage revealed the inmates' coordinated movements, deliberate distractions, timed diversions, and subtle signals between allies. One faction attempted to breach a cell door using improvised tools, testing the limits of ADX Florence's reinforced barriers. Inmate brotherhoods demonstrated their power over others. Tattoos, symbols, and whispered codes communicated allegiance, fear, and hierarchy. The lines between rival groups blurred as some factions allied temporarily for the greater goal of disruption. Internal betrayal surfaced. An inmate previously loyal secretly provided information to a faction outside the core leadership, introducing a dangerous variable into the carefully orchestrated plan. Lieutenant Harris began noticing patterns in the chaos. He traced the disturbances and identified repeat behaviors, signs of deliberate experimentation by the Brotherhood. His concern grew as he realized the coordination extended beyond the yard into corridors and even administrative vulnerabilities. He reviewed security tapes frame by frame, attempting to map the network of influence that had quietly grown within the prison. Meanwhile, the feeding system added another layer of tension. Inmates subtly communicated through meal lines, exchanging messages and testing loyalties. Rival factions clashed briefly over food allocations, revealing both minor and significant hierarchies within the blocks. Even mundane routines, showers, cleaning, and mealtime, became a web of observation, manipulation, and small tests of control. The riot reached its apex by late evening. Screams and shouts reverberated through the concrete halls. Officers moved with urgency, attempting to quell the chaos while maintaining control over both physical and psychological territory. The Brotherhood exploited every opportunity. A misstep by guards, a miscommunication over surveillance coverage, a slight door malfunction. Every calculated move was designed to test the prison's defenses and push the limits of control. Hidden meetings continued amid the turmoil. Brotherhood leaders reassessed their plan, adjusting for unexpected betrayals, unforeseen guard reactions, and small logistical failures. Their adaptability was striking. Each adjustment demonstrated an intimate understanding of both human behavior and the prison environment. In the shadows of the riot, a critical discovery was made. Investigators and some officers uncovered partially executed escape plans. Improvised tools, coded messages, and mapped weak points in reinforced areas. The Brotherhood's ambition was no longer theoretical, it was concrete, and the potential for a full-scale breakout loomed. As night fell, ADX Florence was in a state of tense quiet, the echoes of chaos still lingering. Officers regrouped, inmates returned to their cells, and temporary order was restored. Yet the cracks in the system had been revealed. Corruption, gang influence, and human error had combined to create a dangerous environment. Lieutenant Harris reviewed the final surveillance feed of the day and froze. One of the Brotherhood leaders had vanished from the footage for several minutes, long enough to raise suspicion. The question hung in the air: had they discovered a previously unknown vulnerability, or was this the precursor to an escape attempt that would push ADX Florence to the breaking point? The night had fallen over ADX Florence like a steel curtain, cold and impenetrable. But inside, the prison hummed with tension, a storm that had been building for months now ready to erupt. The Brotherhood had grown bolder, exploiting every weakness, distracted guards, small procedural errors, and the hidden corruption that had quietly taken root among staff. It began in cell block 12, where a small faction had positioned themselves near a rarely checked ventilation shaft. Improvised tools glinted under the dim blue light as they tested locks, quietly communicating in coded gestures. The rest of the Brotherhood prepared diversions elsewhere. Minor fires in trash bins, timed loud arguments, and coordinated disruptions in adjacent wings. Every action was precise, a calculated step in a larger plan. Lieutenant Harris moved through the corridors with heightened awareness. Reports of unusual movements, small mechanical failures, and minor skirmishes had reached him, but the scale of what was unfolding was far beyond expectations. He watched as surveillance cameras flickered with activity. Inmates moving in ways that defied routine, small groups appearing and disappearing in moments, and doors slightly ajar that should have been sealed tight. Meanwhile, in the yard, rival factions of the Brotherhood clashed openly. The air was thick with shouts, the metallic ring of fists against reinforced surfaces, and the tense anticipation of officers. A corrupt guard, bribed to ignore certain movements, subtly delayed response times, allowing the chaos to grow. The riot was no longer a diversion, it was a critical piece of the escape attempt. In the female wing, the tension mirrored the chaos in the main prison. Inmates whispered, guarded secrets, and small confrontations escalated into physical altercations. A minor rebellion over commissary items was met with rapid intervention from officers, yet it highlighted the fragility of order. Young inmates observed carefully, understanding that survival depended on alliances, timing, and the ability to act without being noticed. The feeding system, usually a mundane part of prison life, became another battlefield. Groups of inmates coordinated movements during meal distribution, passing notes and small tools unnoticed. Rivalries flared over perceived slights, and officers struggled to maintain control, further stretching the thin line between order and chaos. The Brotherhood's first major breakthrough came in the late hours. Using a combination of improvised tools and careful observation, a cell door was successfully manipulated, granting access to a previously unused maintenance corridor. The moment was small but monumental. It represented the first tangible step toward freedom. The inmates moved cautiously, aware that a single misstep could lead to severe punishment or death. Lieutenant Harris began connecting the dots, tracing anomalies across the surveillance feeds. He noticed patterns, repeated movements near rarely used doors, coordinated distractions in separate areas, and subtle signals between inmates in different wings. The full scope of the Brotherhood's plan was becoming clear, and with it, the enormity of the threat. Corruption among staff became more evident. Some officers hesitated, distracted, or simply ignored critical breaches. Others actively facilitated minor movements, believing they were earning protection, money, or favor. Every compromised individual increased the risk, making the prison a stage for high-stakes human chess. The night escalated into chaos. Inmates exploited every advantage. Ventilation shafts, maintenance corridors, and moments of distraction created fleeting opportunities. Physical confrontations erupted across wings as rival factions enforced loyalty and punished dissent. Guards struggled to regain control, often facing multiple emergencies simultaneously. In a hidden corner, a young Brotherhood member discovered a critical oversight in surveillance coverage. A sequence of blind spots could allow a small group to move unobserved from one sector to another. The leadership quickly recalculated, adjusting their plan to exploit this vulnerability. Every second now mattered. The line between success and catastrophic failure had never been thinner. Warden Clayton, observing from the central office, realized the scale of the crisis. The combination of gang coordination, corrupt officers, and procedural weaknesses had created a perfect storm. Emergency protocols were enacted, but even these were tested to the limits. He understood that ADX Florence's reputation as the most secure prison in America was on the line. By the early hours, the escape attempt had reached its peak. The Brotherhood had successfully moved a small group into the maintenance corridor, but the riot in the yard had drawn maximum guard attention. Alarms blared, metal clanged, and orders were shouted, yet the inmates pressed forward, their movements deliberate and precise. Then a critical betrayal surfaced. An inmate, previously trusted by the Brotherhood, tipped off a small faction of guards about the timing of the movement. The element of surprise was partially lost. Chaos erupted in the corridor as officers intercepted the group, forcing a violent confrontation. Fists collided with reinforced doors, improvised weapons were brandished, and shouts echoed through the concrete halls. The Brotherhood fought with desperation and coordination, using every tactic they had practiced for months. Officers responded with tactical precision, relying on training and brute force to contain the threat. For a tense hour, ADX Florence became a battlefield, a high-stakes clash of loyalty, skill, and survival instincts. By dawn, the dust settled. The escape attempt had failed, but the damage was evident. Several inmates were injured, minor structural damage was recorded, and the psychological impact on both staff and prisoners was profound. Corruption had been exposed, alliances had shifted, and the Brotherhood had demonstrated the potential to exploit the system again. As Lieutenant Harris reviewed the aftermath, he noticed a critical detail. One member of the Brotherhood was unaccounted for. Surveillance footage suggested he had slipped through unnoticed during the chaos. The question remained, had he truly escaped, or was this part of an even larger, more dangerous plan? The true scope of the Brotherhood's ambition had yet to be revealed. The early hours of morning were eerily quiet after the failed breakout attempt. ADX Florence seemed calm on the surface, but the concrete hall still carried the echoes of shouts, metal clanging, and the scattered chaos of the night before. For the Brotherhood, the aftermath was both a setback and a warning. The system was flawed, but so were they. Lieutenant Harris, exhausted yet alert, began the painstaking task of reconciling surveillance footage, guard reports, and inmate movements. Patterns emerged. The missing Brotherhood member, whose presence had been unaccounted for during the riot, appeared to have exploited a rarely used maintenance hatch to reach an isolated corridor. Every second had been crucial, and Harris knew that a single misstep now could lead to disaster. Meanwhile, Warden Clayton convened an emergency council with senior staff. Corruption among certain officers had been exposed, forcing rapid containment measures. Officers under investigation were immediately removed from duty, while loyal guards reinforced critical positions. Even with swift action, the psychological damage of the previous night lingered. Fear, mistrust, and uncertainty permeated the facility. The Brotherhood, regrouping in hidden areas, faced internal tensions. One member had been caught attempting to communicate with outside accomplices, signaling potential betrayal. Leadership deliberated on whether to abort plans entirely or attempt one final maneuver. Their unity, once absolute, now showed cracks under the stress of exposure and conflict. By mid-morning, Lieutenant Harris traced the missing inmate to a small maintenance chamber, the same area partially exploited during the prior night's chaos. A tactical team approached cautiously, aware that desperation could provoke violence. The inmate, realizing the perimeter had closed in, attempted to hide evidence of the escape plan. Maps, tools, and coded notes were hastily concealed. The confrontation was tense. Officers moved with precise coordination, minimizing risk while ensuring containment. The inmate surrendered without major incident, marking the final active participant of the Brotherhood's escape plan. The psychological weight of months of planning, training, and risk now culminated in quiet surrender, the endgame of a meticulously orchestrated operation. Elsewhere in the prison, minor factions of the Brotherhood who had stayed behind observed the capture. The hierarchy had shifted irrevocably. Loyalty had been tested, trust betrayed, and plans shattered. A few attempted minor acts of defiance, but swift containment ensured that chaos could not reignite. The warden, surveying the restored order, faced the realization that ADX Florence's security was stronger than any inmate, but also that vulnerabilities could never be fully eradicated. Procedures were rewritten, surveillance protocols enhanced, and staff retrained. Yet, the incident would leave a permanent imprint, a reminder of human ingenuity, corruption, and the unpredictable nature of those behind bars. In the female wing, subtle relief was felt. The minor uprisings and tensions over the past chapters had been quelled, and normal routines cautiously resumed. Birthdays, meals, and minor daily interactions took on a different tone. Inmates aware of the near breakdown of order, adjusting to survive in a system that could shift in an instant. By late evening, ADX Florence returned to relative calm. The Brotherhood was dismantled, captured, and incarcerated within more restrictive zones. Injuries were treated, reports were filed, and the prison's reputation for maximum security remained intact, officially. But the story left a lingering shadow. The demonstration of coordination, the exploitation of human error, and the existence of hidden vulnerabilities were lessons not easily forgotten. Shocking twist. Weeks later, during a routine maintenance check in a rarely inspected storage room, officers discovered a small stash of tools and coded messages hidden behind a false wall, items overlooked during the final sweep. Though the escape attempt had officially failed, it became clear that fragments of the Brotherhood's plan had persisted, waiting for another opportunity. ADX Florence had survived, for now, but the shadow of human ambition and corruption remained. The walls may be reinforced, the gates locked, and the officers vigilant, but even in the most secure prisons, human ingenuity, desperation, and the dark bonds of brotherhood can create cracks that challenge the very notion of containment. If you thought this story was intense, the next one will take you even deeper into the world behind bars. Subscribe now, you won't want to miss what's coming.